4:12 local time. Strait of Hormuz. Inside the combat information center of the escorting destroyer, the sonar operator leaned closer to his display. At first, nothing looked unusual. The screen showed the same clutter every sonar team expects in shallow, busy water. Distant engines, commercial traffic, tanker vibration, and the constant low background noise of ships moving through one of the most crowded maritime corridors on Earth. Then something changed. A faint sound appeared beneath the noise. Low frequency, slow rhythm, bearing 142. The operator listened again through his headset. The pattern was too steady to ignore. Heavy propeller blades, even spacing. Not a surface vessel, not merchant traffic. Something was moving beneath the water. Con, sonar, possible submerged contact, bearing 142. The officer of the deck did not answer right away. In the Strait of Hormuz, false contacts are common. The water is shallow, noisy, and packed with commercial ships. Sonar can play tricks here. But then the display shifted again. A second signature appeared, bearing 155, almost the same acoustic profile. Another submerged contact. This one was moving slowly toward the carrier strike group. The operator's voice became sharper. Con, sonar, second contact confirmed. Subsurface bearing 155. Several people in the CIC turned toward the sonar station. Two underwater contacts, both with diesel-electric characteristics, both approaching the same area. The aircraft carrier sat at the center of the formation. Before anyone could fully process that, a third signature appeared, bearing 168. Another propeller rhythm, another submerged engine, another track, three separate acoustic contacts, three different bearings, all moving toward the same point. The room became quieter. Con, sonar. We now have three possible submarines. For a moment, the words seemed to hang in the air. Three submarines in one of the narrowest choke points of the Persian Gulf, a passage less than 40 miles across. The officer of the deck turned toward the tactical display. Range? The operator checked the data again. Estimated 11 nautical miles. Closing slowly. Speed 4 knots. 4 knots was not transit speed. 4 knots was stalking speed. Slow enough to stay quiet. Fast enough to shift position. Inside the CIC, acoustic analysts began working quickly. Blade count, propeller rhythm, engine harmonics. Every submarine leaves a signature in the water, almost like a fingerprint. Within seconds, a classification began to form. Diesel-electric propulsion, large propeller diameter, heavy hull displacement. One analyst leaned closer to the console. Possible Kilo-class profile. Another technician checked the second contact. The third signature is smaller, could match a Fateh-class profile. Iranian submarines were operating inside the strait, and they were already close enough to matter. 4:14. The tactical display updated again. Three red symbols appeared beneath the surface layer of the map. Each one moved slowly closer to the carrier strike group. On the surface, everything still looked ordinary. The aircraft carrier continued through the shipping lane at steady speed. Destroyers and cruisers held their protective positions around it. Tankers moved through the traffic separation lanes. Morning sunlight reflected across the calm Gulf water. Nothing looked out of place, but beneath the surface, the geometry of a coordinated underwater strike was beginning to form. 3 submarines, 3 approach angles, 1 central target. The sonar operator listened again. One propeller noise faded briefly, then returned. One submarine had changed course. Bearing shifted 5 degrees. Now it was moving directly toward the carrier's projected path. Inside the CIC, the tactical officer spoke quietly into the internal communications line. The bridge CIC, possible triple submarine contact. Recommend anti-submarine posture. On the carrier's bridge, the captain received the report without interruption. 3 submarines, inside 11 nautical miles, converging. There was no shouting, no dramatic pause, just a calm response. Very well. Then came the order that changed the posture of the entire formation. Set condition 3, anti-submarine watch. Across the strike group, the shift began immediately. Sonar systems moved to active standby. Helicopter crews started engines on the flight decks. Destroyers adjusted spacing around the carrier. The formation tightened. But under the water, the submarines kept moving. Slow, quiet, patient. 4:17. The sonar operator heard it first. A sharp metallic sound carried through the water. Then came the sudden burst of a high-speed propeller. The acoustic spectrum spiked. The operator looked up. Then came another launch signature. And another. 3 separate sources. 3 different bearings. All accelerating. His voice cut through the CIC. Torpedo in the water. A second later, he corrected himself. Multiple torpedoes. 3, correction, 4, high speed. On the tactical display, new contacts appeared like arrows moving through the ocean. They were already traveling faster than any submarine, heading straight toward the carrier strike group. 3 Iranian submarines had launched their underwater weapons. and beneath the dark waters of the Strait of Hormuz, a countdown had begun. 4:18 local time. The call echoed through the Combat Information Center. Torpedo in the water! For a fraction of a second, the room went still. Then training took over. Every screen in the CIC shifted into tracking mode. Sonar returns filled the displays as the incoming threats cut through the narrow waters of the strait. The sonar operator locked onto the first contact. High-speed propeller signature, strong cavitation, bearing 153, speed increasing. Con, sonar. Torpedo 1 confirmed. Range 8,000 yards, closing fast. Another operator locked onto the second. Second torpedo, bearing 166, similar profile. Then the third, then the fourth. The acoustic picture stabilized. 4 separate underwater threats, launched almost at the same time, from 3 different directions. The pattern became clear immediately. The tactical officer studied the screen for less than 2 seconds. Triangulated attack pattern. The submarines had not launched randomly. Each one had fired along a different vector, creating a wide triangular zone around the carrier's projected path. The strategy was simple: force the carrier to evade one threat and push it toward another. Classic submarine tactics, extremely dangerous when executed well. On the bridge of the aircraft carrier, the captain received the update. 4 incoming. Different bearings. The decision came instantly. Helm, hardport, 20 degrees. The enormous carrier began to respond. But a ship displacing roughly 100,000 tons does not turn quickly. Even with immense power driving 4 shafts, momentum rules everything. The carrier began its slow arc through the water. Below decks, engineering increased shaft output. Above decks, crew members braced as the giant ship shifted. But a carrier is not meant to outrun a torpedo. That is why escorts exist. 4:19. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers accelerated from their screening positions. USS Mason, USS Gravely. Their mission changed instantly. Protect the carrier, deflect the incoming threats, find the submarines. Deploy Nixie. The order moved across both destroyers at once. Behind each ship, the AN/SLQ-2 5 Nixie torpedo decoy system entered the water. A long cable streamed behind the destroyer, towing a small acoustic emitter through the sea. Seconds later, the device began broadcasting a powerful artificial signature, louder than the ship itself, designed to pull incoming torpedoes away from real targets. Inside the CIC, the tracks continued closing. Range 6,000 yards, speed 50 knots. The water around the strike group became a storm of sound. Destroyers turning, decoys transmitting, sonar pulses beginning to roll outward. Above the formation, the first helicopter lifted off. An MH-60R Seahawk climbed from a destroyer's flight deck, rotors beating the air as it accelerated low across the water. A second Seahawk launched moments later. Their crews already knew the mission: locate the submarines, because once a submarine launches, it gives away part of its position. 4:20. Back inside the CIC, the torpedo picture tightened. The first incoming track changed course suddenly. Its seeker had locked onto the Nixie decoy, trailing behind one destroyer. Contact 1 diverting. The trace bent sharply away from the carrier. The decoy was working. Seconds later, the second torpedo shifted as well. The artificial signature was louder, closer, and more attractive than the fading sound of the carrier's propulsion. But the third torpedo did not turn. Its seeker stayed fixed on the original target. The carrier. Con, Torpedo 3 still tracking carrier bearing. Range under 4,000 yards. Inside the CIC, the tension rose. At 50 knots, that distance disappears quickly. The fourth torpedo also adjusted course, but not toward the decoy, toward the carrier's new heading. The submarine crews had anticipated the evasive maneuver. Their weapons had been programmed accordingly. 2 torpedoes were now following the carrier. The strike group continued aggressive maneuvering. Destroyers crossed the carrier's wake. Helicopters rushed toward the launch points. Sonar systems pushed active pulses through the water. Each metallic ping rolled across the seabed like thunder. Searching, listening, hunting. 4:21. 1 helicopter received the first strong return. Large hull. Depth roughly 400 feet. Bearing matched one of the launch vectors. The pilot banked hard. Contact confirmed. The Hunter had found its target, but behind them, beneath the carrier strike group, the torpedoes were still closing. Range 2,000 yards. Time to impact under 2 minutes. 4:21 local time. Above the carrier strike group, the first MH-60R Seahawk turned sharply toward the contact. The helicopter flew low, only about 200 feet above the water. Rotor wash carved white streaks across the calm surface as the aircraft raced toward the suspected submarine position. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator studied the tactical display streaming from the destroyer below. One contact, large, submerged. Depth estimated 400 feet, speed minimal, trying to disappear. But after launching torpedoes, disappearing becomes much harder. The Seahawk crew knew exactly what came next. Prepare sonobuoys! The rear door opened. Seconds later, the first cylindrical buoy dropped into the sea, then another, and another. Within moments, a line of acoustic sensors spread across the water like a listening net. Each buoy deployed a hydrophone below the surface and transmitted real-time data back to the helicopter. The operator adjusted his headset. Suddenly, the ocean became alive with sound, propeller wash, hydraulic noise, the distant scream of torpedo engines, and beneath it all, the low mechanical rhythm of a submarine. Contact acquired, bearing 164. The helicopter widened its circle. More sonobuoys entered the water. The listening grid expanded quickly across the attack area. In less than 2 minutes, dozens of sensors were feeding data into the strike group's combat network. The seafloor of the Strait of Hormuz was no longer quiet. It had become a live, tactical environment. 4:22. Near the carrier, the incoming tracks continued changing. 2 torpedoes veered away as their seekers locked onto the destroyer's decoys. The first passed safely behind the escort ship and detonated far from the formation, triggered by its proximity system. The underwater shockwave spread outward, but it was well away from the carrier. Inside the CIC, one threat disappeared from the display. Contact 1 neutralized, but the remaining torpedoes kept closing. One began circling the decoy field, confused and searching. The fourth was still tracking the carrier's propulsion signature. Range 1,500 yards. On the carrier's bridge, the captain gave another order. Rudder hard starboard. The giant ship began turning again, changing course to complicate the torpedo's targeting solution. Below the surface, the weapons seeker tried to reacquire the carrier's new position. The acoustic environment had become chaotic. Multiple ships maneuvering, decoys broadcasting false signatures, sonar pulses bouncing off the seabed. For a fraction of a second, the torpedo hesitated. That was enough. The Nixie decoy drifted directly into its path. The weapon locked onto the stronger signal and turned away from the carrier. Seconds later, a distant underwater detonation rolled through the water. The last incoming torpedo was gone, but the encounter was not over. The submarines that launched them were still below. 4:23. The Seahawk tightened its orbit above the sonobuoy field. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator watched the pattern form. 3 submarines, one attempting to retreat south, another slowing dramatically, the third diving deeper, likely trying to hide beneath a thermocline layer where sound bends unpredictably. The operator spoke calmly over the intercom. Primary contact confirmed. Kilo-class profile. Depth 420 feet. The pilot glanced at the targeting display. Weapon ready? Ready. The helicopter leveled over the target zone. Below, the water looked calm. There was no visible sign of the steel vessel hiding hundreds of feet beneath the surface. The Seahawk's weapons officer activated the release. A Mark 54 torpedo dropped from the helicopter, struck the sea with a sharp splash, and vanished beneath the waves. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then its engine ignited. A trail of bubbles marked its path as it accelerated downward. Unlike the torpedoes launched by the submarines, this weapon was being guided by data from the helicopter's sonar grid. Inside the Seahawk, the operator watched 2 symbols move across the display. 1 submarine, 1 incoming torpedo, distance closing rapidly. Underwater, the Iranian submarine crew realized the situation had changed. Their ambush had turned into exposure. They attempted an emergency maneuver. Ballast tanks flooded. The submarine dived deeper, trying to slip into the cluttered terrain near the seabed. But the Mark 54 was already adjusting. It matched the submarine's turn and continued closing. 4:24. A powerful underwater shockwave rolled through the sea. The surface above the point of contact lifted briefly, then settled again. On the Seahawk's display, the submarine contact vanished. 1 Iranian submarine was no longer moving, but 2 more remained somewhere beneath the narrow waters of Hormuz. And the helicopters were already searching. 4:24 local time. For a moment, the surface above the strike group looked calm again. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical display told a very different story. 1 submarine contact had disappeared. 2 remained. Both were moving now. Both were trying to retreat deeper into the strait. But the U.S. Navy already had their positions. Because what the Iranian crews had not realized was that their movements had been tracked long before the first torpedo ever left its tube. 12 hours earlier, before the carrier strike group entered the narrowest section of the Strait of Hormuz, a Boeing P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft had flown a quiet surveillance pattern across the region. The mission looked routine. But during that flight, the Poseidon released more than 100 sonobuoys across a wide grid covering nearly 70 square miles. Each buoy carried a sensitive hydrophone capable of detecting faint mechanical sounds beneath the water. Propeller blades, hull vibration, engine harmonics. One buoy could listen to only a small patch of ocean. Together, they formed a dense underwater detection web, a silent surveillance network already waiting beneath the shipping lanes. So when the Iranian submarines entered the strait earlier that night, the Navy had already heard them, their entry bearings, their speeds, their gradual movement toward the strike group's projected path. At first, the submarines remained disciplined, low speed. Careful navigation, minimal noise, classic diesel-electric infiltration behavior. But the buoy grid had already captured their acoustic fingerprints. Analysts aboard the P-8A and the destroyers could see the pattern forming hours in advance. 3 submarines moving into a triangular approach, each one positioning along a separate attack vector. The geometry was unmistakable. An ambush. Instead of immediately changing course, the strike group continued its planned transit. The carrier moved forward. Escorts maintained formation. Nothing on the surface changed, but beneath that calm exterior, the Navy was already preparing. Additional helicopters were placed on standby. Destroyers tightened their screening distance. Sonar operators watched the buoy network more closely. They watched the submarines move slowly into range. They watched the attack pattern develop. And when the torpedoes finally launched, the strike group was ready to respond. Now, back in the present moment, the trap was closing. 4:25. The second Seahawk arrived above the sonobuoy field. Its crew immediately began scanning the acoustic grid for the remaining contacts. The sensor operator studied the display. One contact was moving south, speed increasing, attempting escape. The other had slowed dramatically, possibly trying to settle near the seabed, where sonar reflections become harder to read. But the buoy network already had their bearings. Contact 2 confirmed, the operator said. Depth 450 feet. The pilot turned the helicopter sharply toward the position. Below, the water remained perfectly calm. But 400 feet down, a submarine was racing through darkness. Inside that submarine, the Iranian crew understood what had happened. Their strike had failed. American helicopters were above them. The captain ordered a deep dive. Ballast tanks flooded. The submarine descended toward the colder, denser water near the bottom of the strait. The crew hoped the seabed clutter would confuse the incoming torpedo, but the helicopter already had a firing solution. Weapon ready, the sensor operator confirmed. The Seahawk stabilized briefly over the target zone. Then the second Mark 54 was released. The torpedo dropped into the sea and sank silently for a moment. Then its engine ignited. A plume of bubbles marked its acceleration as it began tracking. Inside the helicopter, the operator watched the submarine and the weapon move across the display. The distance between them shrank quickly. Underwater, the Iranian submarine attempted a final maneuver. Sharp turn, speed increase, trying to break the seeker's lock. But modern lightweight torpedoes do not simply chase in a straight line. They listen, they adjust, they adapt. The Mark 54 curved smoothly through the water column and reacquired the submarine's acoustic signature. Closing. Closer. Faster. 4:26. A deep underwater concussion spread through the strait. The Seahawk's sensors immediately registered the shockwave. The submarine contact vanished from the tactical display. A rising column of bubbles marked the point far below. 2 submarines were now gone from the network. But somewhere in the complex underwater terrain of the Strait of Hormuz, one Iranian submarine was still moving, and every sonobuoy in the grid was listening for it. 4:27 local time. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical display began to stabilize. Moments earlier, the screen had been crowded with movement. Torpedo tracks, sonar pulses, evasive turns, helicopters crossing the grid above the strait. Now, 2 red submarine symbols had disappeared. One contact remained, bearing 187. Depth unknown, speed increasing. The 3rd Iranian submarine was running. The sonar operator adjusted the gain on his headset and listened carefully. At first, the sound was faint. Only a distant mechanical hum deep beneath the water. Then the signature grew clearer. Propeller cavitation, higher RPM. The submarine captain had increased speed. Running faster meant making more noise, but running slowly meant being caught. The crew had chosen escape. Above the surface, the Seahawk helicopters widened their search pattern. The first aircraft moved west, dropping additional sonobuoys to extend the acoustic grid deeper into the strait. The second circled over the last known contact point, listening for movement beneath the thermocline. Within minutes, the network expanded again. Dozens of sensors were now listening across the water column. Every hydrophone fed real-time data back to the destroyers. Every mechanical whisper was recorded. 4:29. The destroyer's sonar team regained a stronger contact. Con, sonar, Possible submarine bearing 189, range 4 nautical miles. The contact was deeper now, likely moving close to the uneven seabed terrain where underwater ridges scatter sonar returns. The submarine was trying to use the environment as cover. But the Strait of Hormuz is not deep. Its shallow water makes hiding difficult. Every maneuver creates turbulence. Every propeller change leaves an acoustic trace. And the Navy was listening everywhere. The tactical officer studied the display. The submarine was moving south toward the narrow channel leading deeper into the Persian Gulf. If it reached denser commercial traffic, tracking would become much more difficult. Tankers, cargo ships, hundreds of engines, a wall of background noise. The submarine captain was trying to disappear inside it. The nearest Seahawk moved immediately. "Vector to contact," the pilot said. The aircraft banked south and accelerated low over the water. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator watched the data update. The submarine increased speed again. 6 knots, then 8. Too fast for stealth, but fast enough to reach the edge of the sonar grid. The weapons officer prepared another torpedo, but aboard the destroyer, the tactical officer hesitated. The submarine was still inside the surveillance network, still being tracked, still visible. Taking it out now would be simple, but letting it run could reveal something more valuable. Where it went, where it returned, where support might be waiting. The decision moved quickly through the strike group. Maintain tracking, no weapon release, not yet. 4:31. The submarine continued south. Its propeller noise grew weaker as distance increased, but the buoy network kept following. Bearing updates arrived every few seconds. Every course change was logged. Every speed increase was recorded. The Iranian crew believed they were escaping. In reality, they were being watched. Above the strait, the Seahawk helicopters slowly widened their patrol pattern. One aircraft climbed slightly, scanning the horizon for additional surface contacts. The other remained low, orbiting the final submarine's projected path. Below them, the carrier strike group rebuilt its protective formation. Destroyers returned to screening positions. Crews stabilized radar coverage. The aircraft carrier resumed steady speed through the strait. No damage, no crew losses. The entire torpedo encounter had lasted less than 15 minutes. Inside the CIC, the final submarine contact weakened as it approached the southern edge of the sensor grid. Eventually, the acoustic trace blended into the noise of distant tanker traffic. The operator slowly removed his headset. Contact lost. But the data remained. Every sonar recording, every launch detection, every maneuver, stored, analyzed, cataloged. Above the calm surface of the Strait of Hormuz, nothing appeared unusual. Merchant ships continued their slow movement between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean. Sunlight shimmered across the water. The carrier strike group moved steadily west. But deep beneath the surface, the signs of the brief underwater confrontation still drifted through the currents. 2 silent wrecks along the seabed, one escape route leading south, and a message delivered without a single surface strike. In the narrow waters of Hormuz, every movement is watched, every signal is recorded, and every submarine captain now understands one thing. The ocean can hide you for a while, but the U.S. Navy is always listening.